I never wanted to be the only human on a starship. It wasn't something I planned, or dreamed about as a child staring up at the night sky. When the Galactic Concordat offered a single cultural exchange position aboard one of their deep space research vessels, every major government on Earth fought over who to send. They chose me because I was a xenobiologist, because I spoke 4 languages, and because I had, according to my review file, an unusual tolerance for uncomfortable situations. I think they meant I was stubborn. They weren't wrong. The Velkara was enormous and beautiful, in the way that things are beautiful when they were never designed with human eyes in mind. The corridors pulsed with soft light. The ceilings were too high. The air smelled faintly of something I could never quite name, something between rain and warm metal. And the crew, all 43 of them, were Vathi. If you have never seen a Vathi, imagine something tall and graceful, with skin that produces its own soft light. Not a glow exactly, more like the light that lives inside deep-sea creatures, quiet and constant and alive. Their bioluminescence was not decoration. It was communication, emotion, identity. When a Vathi was happy, their light warmed toward gold. When they were thinking deeply, it cooled to blue. When they were angry, it sharpened to white at the edges. I spent my first 3 weeks on the ship, just watching them talk to each other across rooms, without saying a single word. They tolerated me. That is the most honest way I can say it. I was given quarters, a meal schedule, access to the observation deck, and approximately 0 invitations to anything that mattered. I was a formality, a symbol of interspecies cooperation that nobody had actually asked for. The crew was polite the way people are polite to someone they expect to leave soon. Commander Savith was the one I watched most carefully, because she was the one I understood least. She was ancient by Vathi standards, which meant centuries old by mine. She carried herself with the specific stillness of someone who had seen enough of the universe to stop being surprised by it. Her light was always steady, a deep, controlled violet that never flickered unnecessarily. She had spoken to me exactly 4 times in 2 months. 3 of those times were procedural. Once she had simply corrected my pronunciation of the ship's name without breaking her stride. I did not dislike her. I think I was a little afraid of her, the way you are afraid of things that are very old and very certain of themselves. Then came the night that changed everything, though night is just a word I use because the ship kept a cycle, and that is when it happened, in the dark hours when most of the crew was in rest rotation. I heard it before I understood it. A sound that was not quite a sound, more like a pressure change in the corridor outside my quarters, and then an alarm, low and resonant, nothing like the sharp human alarms I grew up with. This one sounded almost mournful. I pulled on my coat and stepped out. The medical bay was 3 corridors away. By the time I reached it, most of the crew was already gathered in the passageway outside, and they were all doing the same thing, dimming. Every single one of them, their light pulling inward, going quieter, as if someone had turned down a dial connected to all of them at once. I had never seen it happen before. I did not know what it meant, but I felt it in my chest like a drop in air pressure before a storm. Herath, the ship's senior physician, was moving quickly. He was one of the few Vathi who spoke directly to me with any regularity, though his version of directness was mostly clinical. He stopped when he saw me and held up one long hand. "Return to your quarters, Dr. Oren. This is not a matter you can assist with." "What happened?" He paused, and in that pause his light flickered once, briefly, towards something I had learned to read as grief. "The commander's daughter. She is experiencing neural cascade failure, the dimming." He said the last 2 words like they had weight. "There is no intervention. Please return to your quarters." He went inside. The doors closed. I stood there in the corridor with 42 dimly glowing aliens, and I did not move. Lishin, I knew her. A little. She was young by Vathi standards, perhaps 60 years old, which in terms of maturity was somewhere close to human adolescence. She had been curious about me, in the careful way of someone who has been taught to be cautious, but cannot quite suppress their nature. She had once asked me, with great seriousness, why humans used spoken language as their primary form of communication, when it seemed so imprecise. I had laughed, and told her we had been asking ourselves the same question for centuries. She had flickered gold for just a moment, before catching herself. I pressed my back against the corridor wall, and pulled out my personal tablet. I want to be clear about something. I am a xenobiologist, not a physician. I have field medic training, which means I know how to stabilize, how to treat shock, how to keep something alive long enough for a real doctor to arrive. I had no business doing what I did next. I knew that. I did it anyway. The Concordat's shared medical database was technically accessible to all exchange personnel. What it contained about Vathi biology was carefully filtered, which is a polite way of saying they had removed everything they considered too advanced for human comprehension. What remained was basic, structural, almost useless. But I had spent 2 months on this ship with nothing to do but watch and document. I had filled 6 personal research logs with observations about Vathi bioluminescence, the way it functioned, the way it responded to stimuli, the way it moved through their neural tissue like electrical current through a living wire. And as I sat in that corridor reading what little I had access to about the dimming, something in my brain pulled at a thread I had not expected to find. The collapse pattern. The way Lian's neural light was reportedly failing, starting at the periphery and moving inward, losing coherence, losing rhythm. I had seen something like it before, not in an alien, in a textbook, in a lecture during my 2nd year of graduate school, delivered by a professor who specialized in neonatal human neurology and who had opened her class by saying, "Everything I am going to teach you exists because someone refused to accept that a child had to die." Synaptic depolarization cascade. In human premature infants, centuries ago, it was a death sentence. The neural pathways would lose their timing, their coherence, their ability to fire in any organized sequence. The brain, so new and fragile, would simply come undone electrically. Doctors had called it irreversible for 100 years. Then someone noticed that the cascade had a frequency, that it was not random collapse but rhythmic failure, and that rhythmic failure could, theoretically, be met with rhythmic intervention. A counterpulse, a way of giving the disrupted system something stable to synchronize with, an external beat to follow until it could find its own again. It was not the same. I knew it was not the same. Vathi neural biology and human neonatal neurology are separated by more than 1 billion years of evolution. But physics, I kept thinking, physics does not care about species. A frequency is a frequency. A cascade is a cascade. I got up and went to the maintenance corridor. I am not proud of what I took. A personal comm unit I was allowed to dismantle for parts. A broken atmospheric harmonizer that had been sitting in a repair queue for 6 weeks. A calibration tool from my own kit. I worked on the floor of my quarters for 2 hours with my heart in my throat, building something that had no name, because nothing like it had ever needed to exist before. A resonance pulse modulator. Roughly, crudely. A device that could emit a counter-frequency signal tuned to a specific bioelectric pattern, if I could determine what that pattern was, and if Lysine's nervous system responded to external rhythm the way human infant neurons did, and if I had gotten the theory right, and if none of my parts were failing, and if I had not just built something that would make everything worse. There were too many conditions. I knew that. I kept working. With just over an hour remaining in the window Harith had given when he briefed the crew, I walked back to the medical bay with my device in my coat pocket and my hands completely steady, which surprised me. I had expected to be shaking. Instead, I was very calm, the way you get when fear has finished its work, and what's left on the other side is just clarity. Herath stepped in front of me the moment I entered. "Dr. Oren, I need 60 seconds with Commander Savath." "That is not possible. The commander is." "Herath." I looked past him. Savath was sitting beside Lian's medical platform, very still, her light reduced to almost nothing. I had never seen her light that low. It was like watching a star go out slowly. "Please." He did not move. So I did something I had been careful never to do in 2 months on that ship. I stopped being careful. I walked around him. Savath did not look up immediately. When she did, her eyes were the eyes of someone who has moved through grief and arrived at the terrible quiet country on the other side of it. I did not perform confidence I did not feel. I did not apologize for interrupting. I simply told her the truth. "I know what Harith has told you. I know what your physicians believe. I am not going to tell you they are wrong, because I don't have the knowledge to say that. What I have is something smaller. A pattern I recognized from human medicine. A device I built tonight that I think might help." I could be completely wrong. It might not work. But I would like to try, if you will let me, because the alternative is something neither of us wants. I stopped talking. Savith looked at me for a long time. Her light was so dim, but it was still there. Proceed, she said. I will not pretend the next 47 minutes were heroic. They were not. They were quiet and terrifying and very slow. I calibrated the device to Lysine's failing frequency, using the only stable biological oscillator I had available, which was my own heartbeat, monitored through my medic's wristband, and fed manually into the device's timing circuit. I had to stay calm. I had to keep my heart rate even. Every time I thought about what would happen if this did not work, I pushed the thought away and replaced it with the memory of my grandmother's voice, telling me about the babies she had helped save in a unit with old equipment and too few staff, and no certainty whatsoever that anything would go right. She had never said the work was easy. She had said it was necessary. I placed the device at the base of Lysine's neural cluster and activated it. 30 seconds of nothing. Then, so faint I thought I imagined it, a single pulse of light moved through Lysine's skin. It stopped. The room was silent. And then it came again, slow and uncertain, like a first breath, like a question being asked very carefully. And then again. Savith stood up. Over the next 47 minutes, her daughter's light returned. Not all at once. Not dramatically. It came back the way mornings come back, gradually, from the edges. The darkness retreating in small amounts until suddenly you realize you can see clearly again. Lysine's neural cascade slowed, stabilized, reversed. The frequencies found coherence around the pulse I was providing, and then, slowly, began producing their own coherent signal, independent of mine. Harath said nothing. He stood at the edge of the room and watched with an expression I had never seen on a Vathi face before. When it was finished, when the readings had stabilized and it was clear that Lysine was going to live, I sat down on the floor, because my legs had apparently been waiting for permission to stop working. I sat there on the floor of the Vathi medical bay with my homemade device in my lap, and I breathed. Savith stood over her sleeping daughter for a long moment. Then she turned to me. She did not say thank you. I learned later that the Vathi do not have an equivalent phrase, not because they are ungrateful, but because gratitude at that level is considered too large for language. Instead, she did something I had never seen directed at any being outside of their own species. She lowered her own light, deliberately, all the way down, almost to darkness, and then she brought it back up slowly, all the way, as bright as I had ever seen her, a deep and steady violet that filled the room. I did not know the protocol. I did not have bioluminescence, so I did the only thing available to me. I nodded, and I cried, because that is what humans do. Later, when Linan was resting, and the ship had begun to glow again from bow to stern, Savith sat beside me in the quiet of the medical bay and asked me something I had not expected. "Your people," she said carefully, "you have lost many children?" "More than you can imagine," I told her, "for most of our history." She was quiet for a while. "And this is why you knew." "That's why we knew. Every treatment, every technique, every piece of knowledge I used tonight came from someone who refused to stop when they were told to stop. We have been practicing the impossible for a very long time." Savith looked at her daughter, then looked at me. "I believed your short lives made you less," she said. "I was wrong. Your short lives made you urgent, and your losses made you dangerous to despair. I didn't have an answer for that. I just sat with her until Lean's light was steady and warm and even, and the ship moved on through the dark, and for the first time since I had come aboard the Velkara, I did not feel like a political formality. I felt like what I was, a human being, a long way from home, carrying everything my species had ever learned about refusing to let the light go out.